expressions of human freedom. Right? So that when we talk about government or governance, or we talk about governance, government or governance is a consequence of human freedom. Since human freedom facilitates a myriad sort of aggregations of human agency, right? You can take human freedom and compile them in many, you can have an empathetic relationship to the world. You can have an apathetic relationship. You can have a very visceral. You can have a motivational blah 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 blah. Because human freedom manifests in so many different forms, and since we recognize that the whole idea of government is a consequence, of human freedom, well, there's going to be equally many different ways in which we can talk about how government and governance unfolds, right? So that the idea is human beings have the ability to choose how they will govern themselves, right? This idea is a consequence, right? Government and governance is a consequence of choice. Very important, right? It's a consequence of choice. So that, in a very real sense, the people, we, the people, as cliche and as corny as it sounds, literally choose how we will be led. Now, in a contemporary sense, this is very, very difficult. It's a super, super important point, though, because people have fallen into the belief, for what reasons I don't know, that because of so much political gridlock, because of so much political instability, that we have lost the ability to affect, to influence our government, or the methods in which we are governed, governance, right? So whether we're talking about the establishment as institution, government, or we're talking about, we know the distinctions between government and governance, or we're talking about the ways in which laws and regulations control the behavior of the population in terms of governance, all of this is a consequence of our choice. Right? You go through Facebook post after Facebook post after Facebook post after Facebook post after Facebook post, and it's like, they don't listen to us, we're not representing our own interests, blah, 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 and everybody, it's like this very sort of dreary, pessimism that has infected contemporary discourse. In a very, very obvious sense now, it's a consequence of our choice. Right? If that government or governance isn't facilitating the needs of the people, then we have to recognize that we, the people, are the cause of that. Right? Because there's think about how powerful Adolf Hitler's regime was. Think about all that he was able to do in the most macabre and disgusting, debased means. People would have thought that there's no way that that regime could have been overthrown. And it was overthrown. You look at our regimes, our states, right? I'm thinking Al-Farabi, but Al-Farabi uses this regime, so I'm channeling Al-Farabi right now. So you think of the regimes that we have existing in a contemporary setting, and you want to say that we, the people, can't make transformations and changes to the government and governance of ourselves, of our bodies, because there's too much political gridlock? Are you serious? Anyway, so it makes no sense. Okay. In doing so, it is inevitable that some will deliberately seek to inflict suffering on others, as is the example of the totalitarian state, right? The fascist state. There is a sense in which, because we have this ability, the people, to choose, and because the people have any multiplicity of dispositions, then, also, just to be really, really quick here, Al-Farabi, love him, it's important to make sure that we do not generalize at this point, right? Because you would be wrong if you were to make the following conclusion. And remember, this is advanced, so you got to put your thinking cap on. Since we, the people, as aggregate, have the freedom to choose, then insofar as we choose our government and the way in which our government governs us. Okay. If we have then a totalitarian regime, the argument might be that we have, and correctly so, might be that one of the reasons that we have a totalitarian or a fascist regime might be a consequence of the will of the people, right? The will of the people, or public opinion, and the political will, to be technical. So that public opinion has informed political will in a homogeneous to homogeneous relationship, such that political will as a manifestation of a totalitarian regime is really the opinion, the desire of the public. It sounds right. It sounds as if it follows. You have to be sure, however, that you don't make generalizations. This is a problem that Daniel Goldhagen had in his conception of eliminationist anti-Semitism, and I brought this up in my, I think, genocide lecture series, which I'll be adding to in a little bit. But the idea is, Goldhagen, no offense to him, but he caught a lot of flack for it, introduces this idea of eliminationist anti-Semitism, and the argument is that the German population had this predisposition towards eliminationist anti-Semitism. And basically what it means is that Germans collectively, for the most part, just had astounding levels of anti-Semitism throughout the population. And he cites many instances within music, within literature, within poetry, within blah, 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 all prior to the rise of Adolf Hitler, such that the public opinion was one that was situated towards eliminationist anti-Semitism. A concept that he develops, very profound concept. Whether it's right or wrong, you got to give him credit for introducing a very sort of, a very hot button topic, right? So Goldhagen introduces the idea of eliminationist anti-Semitism as derived from public opinion and the mass, which is then transferred via choice and freedom of the population to elect someone who represents that stance. That, unfortunately, is Adolf Hitler and Himmler. So Hitler and Himmler now become, in Jose Ortega y Gasset's term, the mass men. For those of you who know the discussion of watching my video series on Revolt of the Masses, Adolf Hitler and Himmler are really mass men in the technical sense. So that the idea of eliminationist anti-Semitism as derived in the public opinion homogeneously, right, represented in political will, then creates the mass man, the leader, the tyrant, right, the evil ruler. And you can't be mad at the evil ruler, because really it was the populace that put him into that position of power. Now, all of that is potentially true. And Goldhagen's account would have been, and I think he might have caught a little more flack than he should have caught, just personally. But, and that might be a contentious thing to say. I don't want to get into the politics of academia. But anyway, the idea is that's a pretty solid account. The only caveat is we have to make sure we recognize that you can't generalize across the population. Of course, there were many countless Germans that aided Jews in escaping and tried their best to help the community, the Jewish community. And this is justified by Himmler's Poznan speech, where Himmler himself is talking to his SS men, and he says, each of us has Jews that we like, right? Each of us has one Jew that we love, and says all the other Jews are scumbags, but this one Jew is a good Jew. If we all say that, then none of the Jews get exterminated. So, the idea, that speech alone is representation, is a good counterexample to probably a misconstrued conception of Daniel Goldhagen's eliminationist anti-Semitism. But the idea is, what we've done is we've made an analysis of contemporary discourse based on Al-Farabi. Right? It's applicable. There's no question that it's applicable. Right? And we've also incorporated Gasset and such and blah, blah, blah. So hopefully that wasn't over the top, but it is what it is. So inevitably, that some will deliberately seek to inflict suffering on others. So I just described that. For Al-Farabi, this capacity to act is an existing factor for all human beings, right? It's inherent because of human agency, right? Human agency becomes the foundations with which we begin our contemplation of government. Political science begins with freedom. It begins with agency, right? I would say that it splits between agency as being controlled and agency as determining more and more rights, right? So you have sort of within, and I don't want to, this is a bit off topic and it's a bit too conceptually out there, but do I want to discuss this? Yeah, I'll just briefly. It has really nothing to do with this lecture. I'm freestyling it, so I'm putting out more than I intend to put out. But really and truly, you can look at political governance, not government, political governance.